Ambergris was and
The
still is
time is
insanely valuable.
8:44
It's used in the
PM.
manufacture of perfumes and also as an aphrodisiac.
Because there's nothing sexier than congealed giant
Crewmate,
squid.
there are
But
two
sperm
imposters
city
in
and
the room.
ambergris were just the icing on the cake. The bit which gave the sperm whales the bulk of their value was blubber, the thick layer of fat which keeps whales and other marine mammals warm in cold oceans.
Blubber was boiled up in big cauldrons called tripods and then refined down into a substance called whale oil. Whale oil was a good lubricant and could be burned in lamps. That was very helpful in the early 19th century because synthetic lubricants and electric lights had not been invented yet. In those days, whale oil lit millions of homes, businesses and public buildings.
The factories of Britain and the rest of Europe would have ground to a halt
my
without
God,
whale
Mary,
oil.
it's
It
so
literally
gross.
greased the gears of industrial pollution.
The first kind of whalers in the Pacific were called ship or pelagic whalers, operating on large sailing vessels far out to sea.
Men would climb way up to the top of the mast, scanning for the telltale spouts of whales breathing. When they spotted one, they'd shout down to the rest of the crew, and the chase was on.
When they got close, small boats would be launched. A person would lean over the side and spear the whale with a harpoon attached to the boat with a long rope.
Then the whale would take off, dragging the whaleboat behind it in what sailors called the Nantucket sleigh
Unversion
ride.
pink.
Might sound fun, but this was the most deadly part of the job. Lots of boats were destroyed and whalers killed.
But, all going well, the exhausted animal would be dragged alongside the ship. If it wasn't already dead, it would be killed with a long lance.
Everyone left the
Next
game.
was the dirty and dangerous job of heating the blubber to release the oil. The tripods belched thick, greasy smoke, and burning oil sometimes set whole ships ablaze.
But the profits meant it was worth the risk, and by the late 1700s, more and more ship whalers were voyaging into the Pacific.
The first recorded to reach Aotearoa was the William and Anne, captained by the famous British-American whaler Eber Bunker. He had transported convicts to New South Wales and then anchored in Doubtless Bay in 1791.
This became increasingly common in the early 1800s, as wealthy ship-owning merchants set up shop in New South Wales and Tasmania.
Increasing numbers of whalers made contact with Māori communities, trading for supplies and recruiting locals as sailors.
Fun fact, the famous whaling novel Moby Dick has a major character called Queequeg. That guy is thought to be based on Te Pehi Kupe, a Ngāti Toa Rangatira who jumped aboard a British ship in 1824 and sailed with it back to England.
5, 4.
As with sealing gangs, whaling ship crews were incredibly diverse. Along with Europeans and Māori, there were Pacific Islanders, African and Native Americans, Aboriginal Australians, Chinese people, more than a few women went to sea as well.
Whaling was a truly global industry, and it transformed the Pacific. New Zealand, along with other places like Australia, Samoa, Fiji, Tahiti and Hawaii, were key hubs for the trade. Settlements like Hobart, Kororareka, Apia and Honolulu exploded into bustling ports where people from all over the world gathered.
Oh crap.
Imperial powers like Britain, Germany, France and the United States were all keen to grab a slice of the growing Pacific whale trade, and conflicts between these powers had a big impact on the industry.
For example, part of the reason British whaling dramatically increased in the Pacific at the start of the 19th century is because of the Napoleonic War. French warships were attacking British whalers in the Atlantic, so they came to the Pacific instead.
Then the 1810s saw a downturn in British whaling when the Brits and Americans started fighting the War of 1812.
From the 1830s, the Pacific whaling trade became dominated by ships sailing out of Massachusetts in the United States.
By that point, there were a lot of whalers sailing around the coasts of Aotearoa. Historian Alexander McClintock estimated that by 1839, about 200 whaling ships were passing through our waters every year.
Partly that was because of a sailor called Jackie Gard, who reported seeing a bunch of whales near to shore in Te Moana Orokoa, the Cook Strait, in either 1827 or 1829.
As historian Alfred Reed put it,
"It was a lucky day for Gard, but a very unlucky day for the whales."
The whales Jackie Gard saw were broader.
Europeans knew them as southern right whales, and the reason they called them right whales because they thought they were the right whale to hunt.
Purawa or sperm whales might have had cool stuff like ambergris and spermaceti inside them, but they were hard to catch. They were fast swimmers and mostly lived far out to sea.
Right whales, on the other hand, were pretty slow and gathered in sheltered bays to raise their calves. They also tended to float after they were killed, while most other whales sank.
That made right whales easy targets, not just for ship whalers, but for so-called shore whalers too.
These shore whalers, as you might have guessed, operated from the shore, using large boats they rowed out. A German scientist, Ernst Diefenbach, watched shore whalers at work in the Bay of Islands in 1839 and gave this fairly graphic description.
Gasping in the agonies of death, the tortured animal
Take that, what?
of blood,
Take that,
flying the
banana.
sea around, beating about with its tail, but it at length dies,
Boy,
exhausted
you
from the many
threatened
wounds
to
inflicted.
eliminate me.
Then the dead whale had to be hauled back to a whaling station to do the processing that other whalers did on board ships. These stations weren't exactly pleasant places. Historian Brad Patterson describes the average whaling station as
A huge open-air slaughterhouse. The beach was covered with the remains of whales, skulls, vertebrae, large shoulder blades and fins. The sands were stained with blood and fat. Chunks of rotting flesh lay about.
Bye-bye,
The
Peng.
small
left
complex
the
was
game.
overhung with clouds of oily black smoke. The stench was intense.
More
But
stars.
while it was messy, shore whaling was extremely profitable and extremely popular.
in 1841, Henry Peter wrote that there was
Scarcely a harbour in Cook Strait and on the eastern coast of the southern island in which there are not whaling establishments. Some historians
3,
today
2,
think
1.
that was a bit of an
And the
exaggeration.
results are in.
But in any case, there were a lot
Bye
of
bye,
whaling
banana.
stations
You've
in New Zealand, and they were
been
only
ejected
possible
until
thanks to close cooperation with local Māori, who
And-
provided food, firewood and labour.
shore whaling stations employed Māori crew on their boats. And as historian Ryan Tucker-Jones writes, those crews included both men and women.
By the 1840s at least, Māori women were even leaping off whale boats into the ocean to spear small porpoises by hand.
Unlike sailors or ship whalers, shore whalers didn't just periodically trade with Māori. They set up permanent or at least long-term settlements, often within or next door to Kainga Māori, which required a whole lot of mutual trust and cooperation.
Contact with shore whalers had an especially big impact in Te Waipounamu. In 1844, it was estimated 2/3 of Ngaitahu women between Koromaka, that's Banks Peninsula, and Aparima, Riverton, were married to whalers. Similar levels of interracial marriage